we're essentially looking at is a big NDTV exclusive report, and that has to do with Operation Sindoor. It's a story which I was able to access, and the big point is this. At the height of Operation Sindoor, Indian Navy ships and submarines were given target coordinates. In fact, they may have been minutes away or moments away from firing. The fleet was told to stand by, and an order to open fire could have been moments away. On more than one occasion, the Indian Navy's ships were put on hot standby. In other words, they were locked and loaded, and the targets that the Navy was looking at were, besides anything else, ships and submarines of the Pakistan Navy, which were docked, for example, at Karachi port. We would have hit them using land attack cruise missiles fired from submarines and BrahMos cruise missiles fired from warships. It got really close because, as I said, on more than one occasion, right, the Navy was on the verge of opening fire. And that aircraft that you see on your screen over there, briefly, which you saw, a variant of the ATR, it's a common civilian aircraft. A couple of days after hostilities between India and Pakistan stopped, there was one of those ATR aircraft which actually ventured out towards India's fleet, which was still deployed. And one of these aircraft, a MiG-29K from the INS Vikrant, formatted right close to it, a few hundred meters away, a short distance away, forcing that Pakistani maritime surveillance aircraft to actually move out. That's what I'm talking about. This, of course, is a file picture, but it was among or possibly the first occasion where the Pakistani Navy was trying to test or probe the Indian Navy. This happened shortly after the hostilities ended, but Indian Navy MiG-29Ks off the INS Vikrant sort of drove that away. Now, you can ask, where was the Pakistani Navy throughout Operation Sindoor? Well, they didn't come out to play. They were entirely bottled up. The Indian Navy qualitatively and quantitatively ahead of the Pakistan Navy. But the detail that we've now been able to actually get is that on more than one occasion, the Indian Navy, right, stood down after being put on a hot standby to take out targets, which included submarines and warships of the Pakistan Navy at dock, at port, in addition to military targets. So it would have been absolutely massive. The reason they didn't do this is because in the escalation matrix, using naval power is in fact something which is higher, and perhaps the government didn't want to do this. Vice Admiral Anup Singh joins us at this stage. Vice Admiral, good to speak to you. Based on this information, which is confirmed, corroborated, and reported by me personally, how close do you believe things actually got for the Indian Navy at the height of Operation Sindoor?
Thank you for having me on your show, Vishnu. As close as you just said, and as close as you mentioned in your article. Basically, the Indian Navy, as most reckonable navies of the world, are supposed to be a silent service. So the powder was kept dry, and you're absolutely right. The Pakistan Navy did not have, as it did not have in 1971, any option but to remain bottled up.
And sir, this also speaks about carrier aviation, not just in terms of formatting with that Pakistani Navy ATR, which happened a few days after hostilities ended, but the fact that we used our aircraft carrier, right, one of the two that we have, to maintain complete air dominance south of the Pakistani coastline is critical and is an example of exactly why the Navy wants aircraft carriers, right?
Absolutely right. And that's why we've been fighting for a long time for 3 aircraft carriers at least. So that if one is under maintenance, as it would be, you should have at least 2 operational, one for each seaboard. And we have the second largest peninsula in the world. We have open sea lanes. We have to protect our shipping. One has to remember that 40% of our GDP comes from the sea because of the sea. Because all our trade of commodities and products, including hydrocarbons, comes only by the sea.
Right. And Admiral, if the Indian Navy were to have attacked Karachi port itself, we could have ended up sinking a large number of Pakistani Navy ships and submarines docked over there. In other words, a navy which never came out to play, in a sense, could have been taken out in the port itself, given the firepower that we enjoy, not just from the BrahMos, but submarine-launched cruise missiles as well.
Absolutely, Vishnu. Despite having some legacy platforms in our subsurface stable, that is our submarines, particularly the Kilo class, which are on their last legs, having gone through many upgrades and many medium refits. Despite that, you'll appreciate the fact that because of temperature, salinity, humidity in the Indian Ocean, which is the worst out of all the oceans in the world, 1/3 of a surface or subsurface post is always under maintenance. That still leaves a large number of submarines available for operations. And the other thing one has to remember is that, unfortunately, Pakistan is stuck with only a Makran coast of about 470 nautical miles plus an armpit, as I call it, Karachi and Qasim. Unlike India, which has nearly 200 ports, out of which 60 are fully operational.
Right. Admiral, you've seen the evolution of the Indian Navy. When we've got missiles like the BrahMos in our arsenal, what does it actually mean? Not just in terms of landing, not just in terms of targeting land targets, but also ships. What does that capability mean for us?
It's huge. It's huge in comparison to anything else in the world, because we were perhaps one of the first ones to have a supersonic, and that at Mark III cruise missile. And today we don't talk of 300 kilometers and limitations. It can go much beyond. And the most important thing in the BrahMos is its CEP, center error of circular error of probability. It is so good, it is so precise that one can hardly escape, the enemy can hardly escape destruction.
Admiral, when I first met you, you were commanding INS Delhi, right? That was close to 30 years ago. You were the first captain of that ship, the first commanding officer of that ship. And she remains a beautiful warship, beautiful, absolutely. But she was state of the art for us at that stage. And you've seen the evolution of naval technology come along. I mean, you rose to the rank of Vice Admiral. Could you tell us how Indian ships built to an Indian design for the Indian Navy, with Indian integration, often Indian weapons, Indian sensors, mean that we have our warships exactly the way that we want them to be, which is so important because it's not something you buy off the shelf and then use for your own purposes. It's actually the other way around.
Absolutely right, Vishnu. Absolutely. You cannot buy naval platforms off the shelf. Firstly, because for a country like ours, which is in the tropics, you need to have even air conditioning systems with sufficient dehumidification for protecting weapons and sensors, and for providing the right kind of ambient temperatures and humidity control systems for people, for the crew. Secondly, our requirements are entirely different on warships than, let's say, people in the European Union, people in America, people even in Australia and New Zealand. So you have to build, and before building, design to your specifications, your systems, your accommodation for crew, your living standards, and the requirements for the crew for every facet of life. It's a city at sea.
Yep.
And your cities at sea have to be built to your specifications. So we've come a long way. And thanks to our ancestors in the white uniform, who said even to the British in 1946, we don't want a buyer's navy. We need a builder's navy to start.
Sure.
And as you rightly remembered about Delhi, I've always remarked she's the best destroyer this side of the Suez, even though the follow-ons are a little more contemporary in their systems. But we've had such a great head start because of this.
Yeah. No, indeed, sir. Wonderful speaking to you. It all became extremely close. As I mentioned in my report, on more than one occasion, the Indian Navy was put on high alert to actually launch. It was that close. Eventually, those launch orders didn't come because that would have meant going up the escalation matrix, which the government felt wasn't necessary at this stage. Thank you, sir, very much for being with us. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to move